Hello all, I just wanted to show you a solution to the LightBulb class-based assignment that uses a level manager. So rather than write up a solution myself, here's one that one of the students submitted, and it's perfectly fine. And you can see that there is a level manager game object in here. You can't actually see it. Let me just put a tag on it so we can sort of, where is it? So there it is, but it's not actually visible in the scene, so you can't see it here. And it works perfectly well. I hit the play button. I will walk over to the auto switch, the light goes on, I walk away from it, the light comes off, I go over to the manual switch, I press the space bar, it comes on and goes off. So it works perfectly well, but they've used a level manager. So let me quickly show you the code. Here's the level manager. Here's the code. Here's the code for the level manager. The level manager has a reference to the light bulb controller. So let me just go back here and explain that. So the level manager here has a reference to the light bulb controller, which is on the light bulb, and all game objects can easily get at the level manager because it's a singleton. It uses that singleton pattern that we've been talking about in class. So this game object doesn't have to be, or the script attached to this game object doesn't have to be wired up to the level manager anymore, nor does this one. Any game object that needs to access the level manager can easily do so. And the way you do it is this student has created a static variable. It's of type level manager controller. This is the script that's on their level manager game object, and they've called it LM instance. When they could actually get rid of the start function. There's no need for that. They could have got rid of the update function because they're empty, so it's probably best to get rid of them if you're not going to use them. There's an awake function that gets called when the scene is woken up for the very first time. It's checking to see if this is null, which it will be for the very first time, and then it's putting that variable equal to this object that's been created by Unity. Then it has a turn on light bulb, turn on the light public method, and it has a turn off the light public method. And this method accesses the light bulb controller. So you can see here that this level manager is wired up to a light bulb controller. So let me show you that. So there's the level manager. You can see it's got wired up to the light bulb controller. So this student on the light bulb itself, there is a script called the light bulb controller. So this student would have dragged this game object over here, and the light bulb controller script on this game object is now referenced from the level manager. This is great. So in the previous solution, this game object had to be wired up to the light bulb controller. This game object would have been wired up to the light bulb controller. Now these game objects don't have to be wired up to anything because they can access the level manager because it's a singleton, and it's only the singleton level manager that has to be wired up to the light bulb controller. So it simplifies things. So you can see that this would have been wired up via the inspector, and then it's accessing a property on the light bulb controller called LB on, setting that to true when you want to turn on the light, and LB off, it's setting it to false. And if you want to turn off the light, it sets LB off to true and LB on to false. And that's it. It works pretty well. When this game object walks into the auto switch controller, I have it open here. You see that the student here has added this line in here. So it didn't have to wire up the level manager, as I say. So it just goes level manager controller. So that's the name of the class. LM instance is the name of the static variable, and it calls the method turn on the light, and it turns on the light. This here is an old code that was always in the auto switch controller, and this is the code that actually makes the switch flip up and down. And likewise in the turn off method of the auto switch controller, the student has added this line where they're calling the turn off the light method on the instance of the level manager controller, and all working great. The only comment I would make to it is if you look at the light bulb controller, this is the way the light bulb controller works. So the light bulb controller has a reference to the animator. So again, if I go up here, if I look at the light bulb, there's the script called the light bulb controller that's attached to it, and there's also an animator that's attached to the light bulb, and it has two states. If you look at the animator, it has two states: the light turned off state and the light turned on state, and that's it in the off state. And when there's a sort of a bright light around it, that's it when it's in the on state. So so the lightbulb controller has reference to the animator that's on the game object, and it has these two variables, lightbulb on, lightbulb off, that they're public, and they're both by default the lightbulb on is set to false and the lightbulb off is set to true. When it started, it sets these to sort of sensible values: on is off, true is false. That's doing no harm, although it's already done up here, but you're still doing no harm. And then here you can see there's an update function, and the update function is which gets called every frame. So this could be typically called 60 times a second. So 60 times a second, Unity is calling lightbulb switch on, then lightbulb switch off, lightbulb switch on, lightbulb switch off. And what the switch on function is doing is saying, listen, if the variable LB on is set to true, well, set it to true again. Make sure LB off is false, and then call the lightbulb animator and set the bool, set the property light off JB that's on the animator, set it to true, and that causes that makes sure that the animator is showing the light bulb in the on state. And similarly with the light bulb off, it's almost exactly the same, but just sort of it's checking if LB off is equal to true, and it's setting it to false. My issue with this, and it works absolutely perfectly. My issue with this is, as I say, the update function is getting called 60 times a second. So 60 times a second, you're checking if you're checking this, and 60 times a second, you're checking this. So let's, for one moment, pretend that the light bulb is the LB is off. So 60 times a second, you'll call this. It will say, is it true? And it won't be. And then you'll call this and you'll say, is this true? And it will be. You'll set this to false, you'll set this to true, and you'll set this bool in the animator. Then 1/60th of a second later, you'll call this again. You'll say, is this true? It's still not true. You'll call this, you'll say, is this true? And you'll say, yes, it still is true. So you'll set this to false again, even though it is already false. You'll set this to true again, even though it's already true. And you'll set this property to false again, even though it's already false. So you're sort of repeating what you're doing, and you're repeating this 60 times a second. There's no need to do it. A better solution is, so this student is controlling from the level manager controller. They control how the light bulb is turned on and turned off by setting these variables LB on and LB off. A much better solution would be to take this method here, light bulb switch off or switch on, and anytime you want to turn it on, just call that function like that. Call that function like that. So anytime you want to switch it on, and let me sort of change that one more time. Sorry, I'm going to just make one more change. Anytime you want to switch it on, go LB controller light bulb LIGHT. Is that what? Oh, let me get the name of that again. Sorry, this is it. And go. So anytime you want to turn it on, this function will get called. It'll set the appropriate variables to the appropriate value, and then call the function. Anytime you want to turn it off, this function gets called. It'll set the variables to the appropriate value, and then call LB off. And now what I would do is I would get rid of this. So now what's happening is the light bulb controller isn't constantly checking, is it on, is it off, is it on, is it off. The light bulb controller actually does nothing. And the auto switch controller, when the hero walks into it, will call, for example, turn on, which will call the turn on the light method on the level manager, which in turn will call on the turn, which will set these variables on the light bulb controller, and will call the light bulb switch on method, which will switch it on. So you're not calling this constantly like we used to be. Now you're only calling it when the hero walked into the auto switch controller, which resulted in this being called, which now results in this being called. And if the hero never walks into the auto switch controller, then this method will never be called. And then because this method will never be called, this will never be called, so this code will never be called. So it's much more efficient code. Rather than constantly checking it, we only call these functions when need be. With that said, the old way did work, but this is a more efficient way. Just before I sign off, let me just save this and make sure it does indeed work and I don't have any errors. Hit the play button, walk up. Yeah, it still works perfectly, but in the old way, as the hero just sits here, the script on the light bulb controller script was constantly checking, is it calling the light bulb on, light bulb off, light bulb on, light bulb off, and it didn't have to. Now that method only gets called when I walk into that, or it only gets called when I come over here and press the spacebar, for example. Other than that, it was a great effort. It was well done.